Have you ever wondered what it takes to sell a podcast concept to a major network? In this episode, award-winning podcast producer Keith Reynolds, founder of SPOK Media, pulls back the curtain on the process. Discover how to craft a compelling pitch and navigate the world of networks. Keith shares invaluable insights and advice to help you turn your podcast dreams into reality. Join us for this enlightening conversation to take your podcast journey to the next level. Hello, incurable creators. I'm excited to bring you some bonus episodes featuring exclusive interviews from the 2023 PodUp Virtual Podcasting Summit. Each Thursday for months, you're going to hear interviews from a diverse range of podcasting and marketing experts. My hope is these repurposed interviews will inspire you with new ideas and insights to take your podcast to the next level. And of course, remember to listen every Tuesday for our regular episodes of Podcasting Secrets as well. Now, let's dive into today's bonus interview from PodUp's 2013 Podcasting Summit. Hello, I'm Nathan William, the CEO of PodUp, and your host for the Podcasting Summit. In this interview, I'm joined by Keith Reynolds. Keith is an award-winning podcast producer and the founder and executive chairman of SPOK Media. Prior to SPOK, he was an award-winning audiobook director for Audible, and before that, he bummed around the music business, producing various hip-hop, rock, and R&B artists, writing weird jingles for reality TV shows, and lots of other boring stuff like that. Thank you so much for joining us on this interview, Keith.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. Excited to be here.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about selling your podcast concept to a major network. Let's just start by kind of defining what that is. First of all, what does SPOK Media do? And then what are these major networks that you're wanting people to consider selling their concepts to?
Yeah, so SPOK Media is a creative studio and podcast production house. So I think a good way to think about it, if you compare it to the television world, right? You've got ABC, Netflix, NBC, all of these different financiers that distribute television. They're the vanity cards that you see at the end of your favorite shows, right? That's kind of where SPOK fits in. Those are the companies that create television and then it's distributed through a Netflix or an NBC or whatever. In the audio space, SPOK operates much in the same way. We develop concepts. We will either develop things in-house or we will find a creator or writer that we're really intrigued by, a personality, partner with them to develop something, and then we'll take it out to market to the major players in the podcast network space, the people who are financing, distributing, and monetizing projects. So Wondery and Amazon, Apple, Audible, iHeart, really anybody that is, Sony is another great one. Anybody that is financing, distributing, creating an audience, and monetizing that audience.
So you help people that might have a reach or an interesting story to put together a show concept that could get picked up by one of these major podcast networks.
Exactly. So that's really where we come into play, and whether we're developing it in-house or partnering with somebody to take it out. And I think, that's kind of what you guys brought me in for, and what we're here to talk about is how we actually get those things sold into that major network ecosystem.
So let's say I'm interested. Let's say I would like to do a show for one of these major networks. Where do I start in that process?
Well, I mean, there are so many places, right? But I think, look, I came from the music business originally. I am a long-standing worshiper at the altar of Quincy Jones. And one of the things that he always used to say is, if it doesn't give you goosebumps, it has absolutely no chance of giving anyone else goosebumps. And so I think one of the toughest things to do as a creator is to really be accurately self-critical of what your idea is and who it serves and where it can find a home. So I think that's step one. It's like, you've really got to feel confident that whatever you've got is something special. And so it's got to really give you goosebumps. And so that is step number one. And from there, in terms of our process, look, I think getting in the door anywhere is hard, right? So much is about your network and who you know and who trusts you as a creator, and getting started can be really hard, right? Like I remember when I was getting into the music business, you're going around trying to bring your stuff to people, and the immediate question is, well, who have you worked with and who do you know? And they want that trust. And so like when I got into the podcast business, I was coming from Audible and had a reputation there and knew some folks through that. And so that really helped to springboard me. So much is about building your network and building a trust that you're able to deliver something really great and unique. And, with SPOK, one of the things that we did early on was we did a lot of for hire work for people, and really just kind of establishing that trust and that quality and that brand of what we do. And that opened up a lot of doors to be able to start shopping our own originals around. So, I mean, it's a complicated question of that inception point, right? You've got to have a great idea, and then you've got to have people within your network that will at least give that idea a fair shot. And to be clear, if it truly is something that special and you send it out cold, somebody will take an interest, right? But it's really got to be above and beyond if you're coming in cold. So that's one of the things that we come in and really try to help creators out with when we're partnering with someone is how do we develop this into a really nice package that is going to catch somebody's ear, right? You're talking about people who are at these different networks that are getting a ton of pitches every day. And so it's, how are you going to stand out? How are you going to be something really special? And everybody's kind of coming in with the same things, right? You've got a pitch deck that you want to make really nice and really stand out and snazzy and have a clear outline of what the show is. You hopefully have a trailer or some sort of sizzle reel, because if you don't, the first question you're going to get asked is, well, what does this sound like? Right. And so those two elements are really key in terms of physically taking something out to market. But so much of it is your relationships and who's going to trust what you're bringing to them has promise and is worth taking time with.
Can you share with us some examples of some great concepts that you guys have been part of creating and pitching?
Our latest one, Under Cover of Night, that we did with Apple TV Plus, their podcast division, was something that landed on our desk. Actually, someone reached out to my partner, Aaliyah Tavakolian, on LinkedIn 3 years ago, maybe more, and kind of gave us the rundown of the story. And it's this woman in Texas. She's a British expat, and it's in the 80s and 90s. She dies mysteriously. There's a lot of rumors around, was she a spy? Was she this? Was she that? And they had primary access to the story. And so all of those things were really very intriguing. And it just immediately, like, as soon as you read a few lines, you were like, oh, I'm excited. I need to learn more about what's going to happen. And that, like, it's just like, any kind of storytelling, right? At the end of the day, you have to make sure that the audience wants to know what happens next. And that's so much of what comes into a great pitch and a great concept and a great package is, give me something that shows me what this is and makes me understand very clearly what it is and what it could be. But also leave enough so that I'm wondering, like, well, where does this go? Like, what happens? I need to know more.
So someone walks into your office, and maybe they're a celebrity, maybe they have some following, and they want to build an amazing podcast they can pitch. What advice would you give to them? How do they develop that concept?
I think so much is and again, we do a lot of different kinds of shows, right? So developing a really great chat show is very different than developing a really great documentary series or a really great fiction series. But at the heart of it, particularly with fiction and with documentary, is a compelling central character or characters. So it's a cast of many different people that are kind of interesting is nowhere near as valuable as a cast of one person who is the most compelling person on the planet. So having a really compelling central character, whether you're doing documentary or fiction, is so crucial. And then on the chat side, yes, the personalities are so important, and who's going to be anchoring that, right? Because that's the whole show. But beyond that, is there a community here, right? And I think that is so important with chat shows is there, even if it's a niche community, right? But is there a a group or a community that can be built around this. It's kind of like the old adage of like, you're better off having 100 fans that are truly deeply passionate about what you do than you are having 1,000 fans who are kind of into you, right? And so, especially with chat shows, it's like, are we going to be able to build a really robust community around this personality?
Okay, so let's say that I do have a robust personality. I've come up with a great concept. What are the next steps that are required to prepare for pitching that podcast to the major networks?
The first thing that we're going to do is really dig into the idea. So it's almost like you want to break it apart and build it back up again, and really come in with a critical eye. Again, I think that one of the, writing is revision, and is revision is revision. And so first thing we're going to do is kind of break it down, take a look at what the audience is that we think it's serving, what kind of not necessarily category, but what kind of bucket do we feel like this falls in and fills, and so that we can proceed accordingly. And then depending on what the show is, right, it starts with building a robust, like 2 or 3 page outline that is looking into like a format, style, kind of, words on a page of what you dream this thing could be, right? Refine that, revise that. One of the things is kind of incidental, but one of the things that we'll be doing when building that outline is really thinking a lot about, especially if it's a documentary or a fiction piece, what's season 2, right? You've got a really gangbusters story. It's really hard to make that work financially if it's only 8 episodes or 12 episodes or whatever it's going to be. So in success, what is season 2? What are we coming back out with? And so that is a crucial piece of that. Once we've got the outline in a place where we feel like it's clear, it's compelling, it's something that everybody can get behind, then we'll go about building a deck, right? And that can look very different depending on what the thing is. But you're trying to make something that looks very I am the worst visual person in the world. FYI, is the reason why I've worked in audio my entire life. But you want to make something that feels luxe, feels professional, feels compelling, and also like gives the vibe of the show, right? So like color choices, style, all of these things are so important when building a deck. If it's a hardcore true crime with a big heavy murder in the middle of it, you maybe don't want to be using like bright pastel colors to build your deck, right? So building the deck, and for some shows, that's where it stops, and we're taking it out to market from there, right? And there are certain things where if the idea is compelling enough, or it's going to be too hard to get audio for a sample or anything like that, may go out with just a deck, right? But for most things, we're going to want to build some sort of trailer or sizzle reel. Like to go back to Undercover of Night, the team built this spectacular sizzle reel that really sold the whole show. Like nobody needed to see anything. It was, you could play that minute and a half and you were in, and again, it's so much of it comes down to great storytelling. And I think trailers and sizzles, like I think back to the music business where you send stuff around and that if somebody is not excited after 15 seconds, like they're on to the next one immediately. And you've maybe got a little bit more wiggle room in a podcast than you do in a 3-minute song. But the reality is you gotta hit it hard, and you've got to be compelling right out of the gate. It cannot be a slow burn. And so if you really drive that home with your trailer, you've got a lot better chance of success. So that's kind of the next steps is outline, really digging into the outline and refining the heck out of it, then building a deck, and then in most cases, building some sort of trailer or sizzle reel or sample that people can hear. Because more often than not, you're not going to be able to sell something without audio.
Any advice for creating a great deck and sizzle reel?
To the deck, again, caveat, because I am the worst visual person in the world, and there are other people on our team that do so much better with that. Decks are the thing I have least input put in on over all of SPOK Media. But I think it's got to be concise. It's got to pull people in right out of the gate. you want to be concise, but don't be afraid to, like many decks that I see, both for ours and for other folks, will have a couple of pages where there's like a solid chunk paragraph of text, right? Because you're trying to get, a lot of information across and not a lot of space. But I think, people are busy, people's attention is hard to grab. And so you want to start strong, keep it as simple as possible, and really drive home the key things. Like, this is what this show is. This is what makes this special. This is where it can go from here and what the potential is. Like, really drive those things home, and give people a clear, like, your log line is so important. Like, if you can't explain what the show is in less than 2 sentences, then you maybe need to rethink what the show is. And then, the trailer side. Yes. Trailer, similar things, right? Like I said, it's, you want to hit people hard right out of the gate. You've got to always keep in mind that people's attention, number one thing to always remember is that nobody cares. Nobody cares about you. Nobody cares what your idea is, or that you're trying to make it, or that like you're a really good person. Nobody cares. They're listening to 1,000 things a day, and they're looking for a thing that gives them goosebumps. And so when you're building your trailer, don't let it be a slow burn. Don't let it like, well, it's really got to, develop and you'll understand this character so much. Like, no, get right into it. Hit people hard right at the top and keep that pace going. And don't make it more than 2 minutes, because nobody's going to listen to it if it's more than 2 minutes.
Okay, once we've got those materials created, how do we identify the right decision makers within the networks that we would pitch those to, and how do we network to those people?
Man, that is the secret sauce, right? I think, again, it's a hard thing to do, and especially when you don't have a network, or and I mean like a personal network within the industry, it becomes very hard. But I think in terms of identifying decision makers, right, that information is all pretty publicly available. Like, you can take a look within the podcast division of Sony and figure out who you need to be sending things to, right? The Wondery, or, across the board. That said, there are multiple decision makers at every place, and there might be someone like, we're working on something with a network right now that has a queer vertical. And we had a project that fit really well within that vertical. We did not go to the head of the network. We went to the head of that vertical, right? And so signing up for newsletters like Hot Pod definitely will keep you informed. Pod News, all those sorts of things, Ashley Carmen's column for Bloomberg, all of those things. Like, honestly, most of it usually pretty tedious, but there is always good information in there. And if you're regularly reading all of those newsletters, you're going to be up to date on who's who and who you need to go to. In terms of networking and actually getting in touch with those people, I mean, look, Podcast Movement is a great event. Any sort of podcast industry event you can get into is useful. And, don't be afraid to shoot your shot. Like, I think there's 2 things, right? Like, one, don't talk to anybody. If you have the time, like, talk to anybody, because, you never know where a conversation's going to lead. And you might be talking to someone who can't really do anything, but they know somebody, and they know, and you can work your way up through there. But also, like, podcasting is still, while the doors are closing and it's harder to get in, right? But it's not quite as stratified as like Hollywood or the music business. And so, we landed Netflix as a client because my partner, Aaliyah, 2018 Podcast Movement, she was like, I want Netflix, and Ray Vada is going to be there, and I'm going to talk to her. And now, granted, like, we had a catalog of work, we had a reputation, like, we weren't coming in completely cold, but we had never talked to anyone at Netflix before. And Aaliyah reached out cold through the Podcast Movement app, I think, or maybe LinkedIn or something, and said, hey, can I get 30 minutes with you? And then we walked out of that, and we've been working with Netflix for the last 5 years. So don't be afraid to shoot your shot and talk to as many people as you can. And, like, not for nothing, like, take an improv class, go to go do Toastmasters. Like, if you're really trying to get out there and sell yourself, and that's not necessarily your thing, because, like, quite frankly, it's not most people's thing. Like, most people are not good at that. So one, if you're not good at networking, you are not alone. That is most people. But two, it's a skill you can develop, and there are tools that you can use to help develop that skill set to serve you.
So let's say we've created our materials, we've gotten the attention of the right person. What advice can you give us on the negotiations, maybe the critical terms and the other aspects that we should be focusing on in those negotiations? Or am I just way too far ahead of myself here?
No, this is great. This is great. But yeah, let's say you've taken it out. You've gotten no's most of the places you've gone, but you've got one place that's really interested and wants to make an offer, right? There are a lot of different things at play and different things to consider. And the first thing I would say, and this kind of dovetails to the networking side of things as well, if I could go back and give my 18-year-old self any piece of advice, it would be find someone to take advantage of me. Because I can remember starting the music business and being so concerned about my IP and like getting ripped off. And the reality is that's going to happen one way or another, whether, it's the normal kind of someone screwing you over or it's an egregious, whatever, that's going to happen. The more you build your network, the more people you know, the more your credibility rises, the more leverage you have in any kind of deal. And so I would say if you've never made a hit podcast before, you've never worked on a hit podcast before, and you're trying to sell something into a network, right? You're probably going to take whatever deal they offer you. You might want to push back on a few things, but like consider that your opportunity to make a little bit of money, but more importantly, have your name on this thing and this that could do very well and serve as the springboard for the next thing. And so that's what I would say is one, like understand your relative leverage in the deal, right? Like how much have you done before? How much do they need what you have versus you needing what they have, right? Or do you have other players at the table? So always advocate for yourself, but be very aware of what your negotiating leverage is in any given deal. In terms of the specifics, right? It's like, there are so many different ways to construct a deal. If you like, for some people, it may be, a simple show. They don't need money to produce it, right? And so they're just trying to get the best back end deal that they can. For a big documentary series, you're going to need a production budget, and all of those things kind of like weigh against each other. So I would say one, let's break this up into two things. Chat shows, you're doing a chat show, let's say you're the host or whatever, it's very inexpensive to make, you don't need a budget. Try to get a minimum guarantee from the network against the ad sales, right? So that's number one. Again, it's all about leverage. Like if you're nobody and they don't really feel like they need to give you a minimum guarantee, they're not going to offer it, but try to push for it. Try to have a very clear understanding of what the network's promo plan is for your show. How are they building your audience, and what audience do they expect to deliver on what their plan is? And also, what are you getting charged for that plan? So I think a really important thing to understand is recoupment. Ultimately, any dollar that the network spends on your show, they're going to put back in their pocket before you ever see any of the splits, right? And so if your split is 50-50 or whatever, which you're lucky if you can get that, and the network spends $200,000 on promo, well, you're not seeing a dollar until the network's gotten their $200,000 back, right? And so, but what a lot of networks can do is, because they've got this vast network of shows, they can provide $200,000 of in-kind promotion, right? And it costs them basically nothing. And so that's a thing that you want. Your ideal is to have a network that has a strong network effect, a bunch of shows that they can use to promote your show for free, but then they're not going to charge you back for that. So that's, I think, one of the most key things. It's like, try to really get non-recoupable promo as part of your deal. In terms of splits, right? Pretty standard is 70-30 in favor of the creator. If the network is, essentially just an ad seller, there's going to be some stuff off the top. They will start with trying to get a 50-50 deal, 70-30 is what you should be pushing for. Again, it all comes down to relative leverage. On the documentary and fiction side, right? Then you're probably going to need a production budget because you probably don't have $250,000 to $500,000 hanging around in your pocket to produce this show. In those scenarios, right, the network's going to want a lot more. And a network is going to come in and say, great, we'll give you the money for the production budget. We'll give you a fee for your production. We're going to take all this and we just own it now, right? And that's where you're trying to, again, it all comes down to leverage, but that's where you want to push for as much as you can in terms of IP ownership, right? Who is owning the copyright to the underlying idea, right? Who owns the RSS feed is another key thing. Those are two of the big ones that I'm always concerned about, right? But again, all of these things come down to relative leverage. So there's shows where SPOK still owns the RSS feed. There's shows where we don't, right? And so it all depends on what you're bringing to the table and what the network is bringing to the table.
What are the biggest benefits, the biggest reasons why a creator would want to go to a network as opposed to just doing it themselves?
Audience. There are all kinds of ad sellers out there, right? And so if you've got an audience already, go get an ad seller that's going to charge you 20 to 30% to sell your ads and monetize your show, and you're good to go. The big thing a network brings in, other than production financing, right, is other than the sheer cash to make what you want to do a reality, is building that audience. That's the main value that they have, is an audience. And so when you're looking at networks, like, you really want to look at, one, what does their audience look like? Like, I mean, obviously, like iHeart, Wondery, like those places, they're massive, right? And so you know what you're getting in terms of audience. But two, what is the makeup of their audience? Like, what is their brand like? And does that fit, because if you're doing a show that just has nothing to do with anything else on the network that you sold it to, like, it's not a great look. And to be fair, also the network probably isn't looking at what you're doing. And it was probably a waste of time to bring it to them. So that's really, like, yes, monetization and being able to sell ads, but there are just so many shops you can go to that too if you already have an audience. It's really about paying the money to do what you need to do and finding the audience for as cheap as possible. Because, like, if you wanted to build your own audience from scratch, right, and you're not a giant celebrity, even if you are a giant celebrity, it can be hard. But if you're not, like, the money it would cost you to build up an audience that a network could deliver for essentially free is astronomical.
In this journey to create a podcast on a podcast network, what are the biggest mistakes that people make, and how do we avoid those?
I mean, I will go back to what I said at the beginning of being as self-critical as possible and really making sure that you have those goosebumps and you feel really confident that it's going to give other people goosebumps as well. I mean, that is so fundamental. And we all, as creators, tend to fall in love with our babies and our ideas. And, again, to go back to Quincy Jones, like, part of the producer's job is to tell an artist that they got to kill their babies, right? And so really know in your heart that you've got something special. I think that's, number one. People waste a lot of time developing and trying to shop and pitch ideas that, like, weren't going to go anywhere in the first place. So start with you. And then again, I'll go back to leverage. Be as aware as you possibly can about what your relative leverage is in a situation, right? And again, it's useful to have a lawyer as part of this. I think agents can be useful, but also they're taking a big cut of what you're making and not always worth it. And so I think so much of it is really understanding, okay, I don't love this deal. I feel like I'm getting taken advantage of, but it's going to serve me as a platform. And nobody else wants to buy this. And I don't know that, like, I can get much more out of this. Right. And so I think that is so crucial. Same token, don't ever take the first offer. Like, don't ever, like, the first piece of paper they put in front of you, do not ever take that. There is always at least one little thing you can change. and always go back with way more than what you want. Be ridiculous. Go back and cross everything out and say, I want this instead and that instead and this instead. And they'll come back and be like, no, 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 fine. No, 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 no. So don't ever be afraid to ask. Like that's part of I think, especially with new creators and with people who have not shopped a lot of things around or sold a lot of things into bigger ecosystems, we are not conditioned in this country to advocate for ourselves and just ask. And the reality is you are not hurting anybody. You are not ruining a relationship. You are not looking a gift horse in the mouth by advocating for yourself and asking for what you want. You're probably not going to get it, but ask for a lot and get maybe a little bit more.
That first point that you made about making sure your concept gives goosebumps. I know in my consulting career, some of the greatest success I've had is when I try a whole bunch of different things. And then I remember one company, it was an airline we were working for doing digital marketing. And we didn't just create a Facebook page for him. We created 100 Facebook pages for him. And then we put a little bit of money behind each of them. And we found 2 or 3 of them that did really well. And we turned off 97 Facebook pages and then doubled and tripled down on the 3 that we knew had performed the best. Do you think that concept would fit here? Instead of just coming up with an idea, should I try to come up with 20 ideas and then survey them and see which one resonates the best with my audience?
It's an interesting idea if you have the resources or like the time to and you have the network of people you trust and their opinion to survey things around and hone in on the things that really excite people. I think that's an interesting idea. I think more broadly, if you don't have that, because that would have to happen before you ever take things out to market. If you are taking a lot of things out to market, you're not going to be able to take anything out to market pretty soon, right? And so I think it's interesting to if you can do an internal survey of things first, I think that's a really cool idea. I will say that to that point though, and this is a thing I forget about because we've been doing it for a long time, but there is a similar thing that happens on a longer scale, right? Where you start to understand what works, what doesn't, what you do really well versus what is not really your wheelhouse. And so I think that is something you want to be aware of over time. And I also think to that end, the place where agents or a consultant like Ben Riskin at Roomtone, who is spectacular, right, is people who know what the mandates are, people who know what different networks are looking for in that moment. And so until you have relationships across a lot of different networks and you can call up so-and-so and be like, hey, what are you looking for right now? Or what are your priorities? It's really helpful to have somebody who's a little bit more inside. If you are looking to take out many different things, someone who kind of has an idea of so-and-so's looking for this, so-and-so's looking for that.
All right, Keith, I received a lot of value from this episode and I really enjoyed it. If the audience did as well, and they want to learn more about you and SPOK Media and the services you guys provide, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Absolutely. Check us out on spokemedia.io. You can see all of our shows, our team, get a little feel for what we do. You can follow us on Instagram at @spoke_media. I think that's our only socials. So yeah, spokemedia.io and spoke_media. And then check out our latest show, Under Cover of Night with Apple TV Plus.
And for those of you that are watching or listening, if you have not yet had a chance to check out the VIP upgrades, please click on the buttons below. And there's some really cool, fun, free bonuses that you can take advantage of. And for those of you that are watching or listening, I wish you success if you choose to pitch your show to a network. Here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, to sell a podcast concept, you need a truly special idea that gives you goosebumps and makes you confident that it will resonate with others. Number 2, building your network and establishing trust is crucial for getting your concept considered. Cold pitches can work if the idea is exceptional, but relationships help a lot. Number 3, creating compelling characters is key for documentary and fiction podcasts. For chat shows, the potential to build a passionate community around the host is important. Number 4, the pitch process involves refining a 2 to 3 page outline, creating an enticing pitch deck, and producing an attention-grabbing 1 to 2 minute sizzle reel or trailer. Number 5, pitch decks should be concise, visually compelling, convey the show's vibe, and highlight what makes the concept special and its future potential. Sizzle reels need a strong, fast start. Number 6, finding the right decision makers involves researching network contacts, taking advantage of industry newsletters and events, talking to anyone you can, and not being afraid to shoot your shot. Number 7, in negotiations, understand your leverage. Always advocate for yourself and view initial deals as a springboard. Push for a minimum guarantee, non-recoupable promo, and favorable splits. Number 8, networks provide the greatest value in audience reach and ad sales. Look for a strong brand fit between your show and the network's existing audience. And finally, number 9, the most common mistakes are falling in love with ideas that aren't actually special enough and not being aware of your leverage. Always negotiate and don't be afraid to ask for what you want. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Podcasting Secrets. I wish you success as you pitch your show to major networks. And if you're looking for a great platform to create, grow, and monetize your podcast, I recommend you check out PodUp at podup.com.